Can everyone see that okay? Just want to make sure. Awesome. Thank you so much for organizing all of this, Madison, and also thanks to Jean and Stephanie for including us in your classes. I'm really excited to talk to y'all about this project, and I know Rachel is too. So just a little bit of how we're going to do this is first we're just going to share the actual video of Blood Meal, and that's the original sort of documentation of the performance, and that's what's projected as part of the installation that is at Fried Fruit currently. And then after that, then I'll share a couple of works that are from my own personal creative practice that kind of tie into different either visually or conceptually tie into Blood Meal. And then Rachel will do the same. And then we'll talk kind of more about the nitty-gritties of the installation itself, the different ways that we've installed it, and also about what it sort of means to work collaboratively across disciplines. So that's just kind of a little overview. And then we'll have time too at the end for Q&A with y'all too. So like I said, since we weren't sure if all of you guys had a chance yet to see the exhibition, we just wanted to make sure that we kind of level the playing field and show you the video first. So that's what we'll do. I thought, there we go. So I'll just say a few words conceptually about it, and so will Rachel, and then, like I said, we'll jump into our own respective works. So the piece that you just showed again was conceptualized as as a live performance. And so what that means is Rachel was performing live on stage, and then the projections that I was kind of like up above doing those live as well. And so it was all pre-choreographed and then sort of re-recorded, and then is presented as this sort of filmed project. And so in general, the piece is about the sort of cycle of life of an organism, and it sort of shows this sort of intricate sort of moving patterns of this organism, and sort of takes you through their sort of birth and genesis, and through this sort of moment of self-discovery, and then this sort of little death. And then sort of the breath at the end sort of concludes that cycle, as then the video actually plays on loop. So then the cycle just continues from there. Rachel, would you like to say a few words too about it?
I never conceived that this would be shown over and over and over again in a loop until we've seen it in the installation where it is right now at Fried Fruit, and it's just so on the nose that it continues over and over again. And while to get this documentation, Katina and I had to do the piece many times because it has to be very precise to work with the projection mapping. And I do think loving live performance and the unexpected that happens during live performance. I'd still love to see what happens with this piece if it does get performed live multiple times so that we have the opportunity to deal with the inevitable mistakes and mishaps that happen in live performance. But yeah, what you see is an amalgam of many runs that we had through, and I think I'm very happy with how it dies, but it never dies.
Yeah, and so we'll jump back again to blood meal, but we wanted just to share a few of our other works that sort of tie into that. And so this work right here that you see is another projection mapping piece that I did called Vivid Light. And you can sort of see again, this piece is also talking about this sort of life cycle, right? And it's also that circular form of projection, much like what you saw in blood meal, right? So like all of blood meal pretty much occurs within that sort of like circular format of projection. And so with this piece, though, the water reflection, as you can see, is what's sort of completing that circle. And so again, I sort of was referencing that. Also, the way that the projections were made for for blood meal, we're also using this sort of oil and water technique, which was also used in this piece, but I'll just realize that I'll jump back to that in a second. So I also, in my own work, use the color red a lot as well. So I think, Rachel and I both are drawn to that and use the color, as you'll see too in her other works. We use the color red a lot in our work. I especially I've never used that large of amount of red fabric, but I use red thread a lot. And I see red thread as sort of this way of connecting, right? So connecting somebody in the present world to to somebody who has passed on, and a way to also connect yourself back to your own heritage as well. So this is a piece, a performance piece that I did in 2022 called In Memoriam. And this piece was about sort of memorializing and creating a sort of performative ritual for my father who had passed away. And so this work was performed in Greece in a 16th century Byzantine bathhouse, which was pretty cool because then again, it was connecting myself back to my Greek heritage. And that's why you see these ribbons that I then tied onto these pillars. You can kind of see it on the right-hand side. And that was referencing pretty much ancient grave markers where they would tie red ribbons. And so the sort of accumulation of these red ribbons on these gravestones showed this sort of devotion to a singular grave site and that person over time. And so that's why you have this sort of accumulation of ribbons that I'm tying throughout this performance onto this site. And on the left is a projection mapping piece of my father's ashes being spread in the Aegean Sea, which was in Greece. So I'll just show you sort of a little clip of this so you can kind of get an idea of this sort of 2.5 hour long performance in a minute.
Oh, I don't like the big thing.
And something that Rachel and I will maybe touch on later too is how, even though we both use the word performance, it's coming from two very different worlds, right? Like the performance art world versus sort of her version of like the live performance world. And we actually, Rachel and I constantly have those conversations, so we can maybe pick up on that conversation later on. And so this piece, the one that I was just talking about when I very first started Vivid Light, again, uses these sort of oil and water technique for the projection that I saw kind of represented like cellular mitosis sort of. And so that's kind of tied to a similar way that I did the some of the visuals for Blood Meal that was also sort of representing this, cellular organism, that was in this sort of like petri dish. And then you'll see that come up in a second too in some of Rachel's work as well. And so this piece too is about memory though, and happy memories and reliving those happy memories of this sort of childhood trip to Disney World, and how those sort of memories can come full circle. So I'll just show you a clip of this as well. And again, using the technique of projection mapping for this project as well.
Katina, where do you want to go? Hey, my name is Eric. Hey. Show me your flag. Your flag.
So I'll turn over to Rachel now.
Am I allowed to ask you a question about that last piece?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay, because the calculations in the projection I know are your father's calculations,
Yeah.
and they went on to sort of illustrate, um, the progression of the illness in his mind. But what was he calculating?
Yeah, so those were like his like financial calculations of his own personal like finances. He'd write everything down in these little scraps of paper. And those were actually like his handwriting that I then scanned in. And so throughout time though, they got more and more sort of scrambled. And
Mhm.
so as if you watch closely of those like little animations of those calculations, you can sort of see the progression through illness throughout the piece as well. But it's just kind of a little nod to that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I just
thank
thought it was beautiful and interesting. I wanted to ask.
yeah, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. I'm Rachel Strickland. Is the next slide just a title image, I think, for
Yeah.
Genesis? Can we go to that one, please? Okay. Um, Subtlety is not a thing that I am known for. As what occurred to me while I was putting the slides together for this talk is how much blood meal is a version of the same work that I've been trying to make for well over a decade. I first conceived this piece, which is mixed media performing arts. It uses aerial hoop contortion and invented apparatus. The invented apparatus is, frankly, a human-sized petri dish. Uh, and what I originally set out to create, this was 2012 when I first conceived of this piece, was actually a lot closer to what blood meal is. What it ended up being is something ultimately more palatable for most audiences. I think I'll just go ahead and show you a clip. Okay, we can just leave that the way it is. So when I first set out to create that piece, I hoped that I was going to create something horrifying. It did not end up that way. It had another life to live. And interestingly enough, a decade after I made that piece, I was able to restage it again. That's the clip that you just saw. That was from 2022 in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was able to present it again and kept it pretty true to form. Wanted it to live in the same way, but it was about the beginning of a life form in that sort of body horror that encompasses the division of cells and what that might sound like and what it might feel like. And I also wanted it to be a microcosm for when you have an idea or a realization, and once you know, you cannot unknow. Sort of like when you realize that you have to leave a current situation, whether it's a relationship that's become a foundational part of your life or a job. And then once you have that realization, you cannot unrealize that. And that's part of what was being born in the petri dish. Interestingly enough, as you can see from this piece, teeth, it uses the same fabric that is used in blood meal. In Genesis, with the petri dish, there's a small piece of red fabric that we lovingly refer to as the placenta, and it covers the top of the petri dish at the beginning of the performance. as a sort of a membrane, it's the exact same fabric, like same touch, same feel, same color, same consistency, the same red chiffon. And I didn't even realize it until I was sort of in my costuming room looking for something, and I realized I was holding two of the same pieces of fabric, just very different ways. So there are themes that haunt a career, and you just can't shake them no matter how many pieces you make. And this is one for me, the red fabric. Teeth is the other piece that I wanted to talk about. It's actually an excerpt. It uses dance and spoken word / memoir and invented apparatus. In this case, a 40-pound red skirt. The red fabric that you see in Blood Meal and that's literally hanging in Fried Fruit in the gallery. If you go and take a look at the installation, it is a skirt. There is a hole in the center, and it's about 45 feet square, and weighs a little over 40 pounds. Do you want to go ahead and just play this clip for me?
I live in a female body. And what that is like living in a really nice house that everyone else thinks is their house. They don't mind that you live there so long as you don't get any ideas about owning the place or making any changes. Like here, stand on this pedestal, but remember who put you there. It is being a conquest to be gained, consumed, multiplied, and replaced. The female body is celebrated for a capacity to create and sustain life, copulate, procreate, nourish, and dissolve.
Thank you, Katina.
Yeah.
That's just a tiny little excerpt from a piece that's 9 minutes. That piece is actually part of a one-woman show that's in progress that I'm building now. But I just wanted to show how the same apparatus could be used so differently in two completely different pieces. What were you going to say, Katina?
No, I was just gonna say that it is literally the skirt, the apparatus that she's talking is it literally takes up an entire theater. So if you imagine walking into like theater, seeing a stage, it covers from inch to inch an entire theater space. And that's so like when we filmed Blood Meal, even though you only see, because it's only lit with projection, you only see, you know, that little circular bit of it, but the actual fabric itself was filling the entire the entire theater itself. And so I think one of the challenges too was kind of finding that hole, right? Like in the middle of the piece when Rachel had to sort of like, you know, she was sewing through the fabric and then had to pop through, you know, midway through that was one of the challenging things, was not only like lining up with the projection, but like she had to kind of find the hole of the fabric in the dark.
And it has to happen at the exact correct moment. That's the anxiety. It's a necessary anxiety for the piece.
Which is, yeah. And so we like as Rachel said, we had hoped to sort of perform it live again in the future. And I think that's obviously still on the table as well. But so I just wanted to shift though to talking about working collaboratively and also to talk about the installations themselves. And so a few things sort of about this collaboration. So obviously Rachel and I come from separate but yet similar worlds. And we met at an artist residency called Atlantic Center for the Arts, which is in New Smyrna, I think I'm saying that right, Beach, Florida. And it was a 3-week-long residency, an interdisciplinary residency. And so I would encourage all of y'all to attend artist residencies, meet people, and just you know, and try to make work together, because you know, without this sort of idea of collaboration, I mean I could never do what Rachel does, and I think kind of vice versa, right? So it's a really good way to bring other mediums into your work without having to be an expert on everything. And also 2 heads are always better than 1, in my opinion. But the other thing I would say that you really have to be careful with is making sure that it's a true collaboration. I mean, I've collaborated with a lot of people in the past and most have gone well, but sometimes, you know, it's hard artistically to be on the same level, be on the same page in terms of conceptually. And I think the collaboration, I'll just say, you know, with Rachel, like we were were totally on the same, and I think still are, like on the same page about that. And so it's really just finding that sort of like other half of your brain, and that's what I think makes collaborations work. Yeah.
Yeah, we're spoiled for sure. It's just been like it's deceptively easy. Most collaborations don't feel this easy. I've collaborated with a lot of people. They're always rewarding, mostly. They're mostly rewarding. But yeah, this one is it's just there. It's everything is already ready already. There's no way that I could make this without the expertise that Katina brings to the table.
And vice versa. And so, like I was saying before, when we actually created this piece, it was a live performance that was then filmed and documented. And so at first, we were just like, okay, this is something we could show at film festivals. But then I said to Rachel, I was like, well, why don't we turn this into an actual installation, where then the documented video is projected, but then the film, or not the film, sorry, the fabric becomes part of that installation. We can think about, the ways of tying the fabric, ways of making these sort of like literally like blood clots, right, with the fabric itself, and how we tie it. And then we thought, okay, well, how do we, incorporate additional lighting to make this sort of feel like you're like in this sort of inside of a sort of a womb, for lack of a better word, right? And that you're sort of like inhabiting and feeling what we felt in that sort of theater space. So because you can't bring it live to everywhere, we wanted it to still have that same feeling in a small room space. These are just some still photos of the project. And I was going to get to the installation photos. So one of the things that we did do was we did install it as just a projected film. And so this was actually at a yoga studio that had these like huge projection screens. So I just wanted to show what that looked like as a single channel video. But then we had first installed this piece at the University of Kentucky at their Boulevard Art Gallery. And for this was like more of a like white cube type space. And so the projection existed as a sort of like square. And the challenge with this installation was that some of the parts of the wall were metal. And so it's like a combination of both magnets and like nails and hanging devices. But also with the fabric, you can't, you don't want to put any like nail holes in it. So you have to use a series of like clips and rubber bands and that kind of thing to make sure to preserve the actual fabric itself. And I would say, with every installation, you learn something new. So with this version, at first, we didn't have any external lights. And it was like, oh, the projection looks orange. And so does the fabric. And we realized it was the way that the light of the projector was playing with the color of the fabric. It was turning them both orange instead of red. And so then we had to include additional lights with gels to make the space the correct shade of red. So it really is sort of color balancing in real time. And this is a sort of clip of this, what it looked like here. So we then installed it actually in a shipping container. And so it was really interesting because we had heard about fried fruit and we're like, oh, it's in shipping containers. And then I was like, okay, so Satellite Art Fair, which is part of Miami Art Basel Week in Miami, they also were showing stuff in shipping containers. And I was like, cool. And so, but for this, it was all metal walls, so they weren't finished walls. So it had to, again, all be installed with magnets. And I think, Rachel, I think when you first saw these, you're like, these photos, you're like, oh my gosh, it actually looks like a womb.
Oh yeah, so visceral. I love it.
And so you can see they're literally like a shipping container, like on the beach, literally. So these are images from that. And again, this posed its own challenges because it was outside, right? And so things like rain and humidity and weather, it all becomes a challenge. And there was no good really like projection surface for this. So it was projecting on the fabric, which was a different sort of look. But as you can see in the video, since it was outside, you had this like breeze that was coming through that made the fabric look kind of like it was breathing along with the breath audio. That was kind of a cool effect, I thought.
Happy accident.
Yeah. Sorry, I know in the interest of time. So now we're at the fried fruit one. Which again was in a shipping container, but this one had finished walls, but then we also had to contend with glass wall, right? And so we had to think about, okay, how are we going to install this? But then we were like, it's cool because then it could be running and people can see it from the outside. So initially we were going to project it on the wall to the left, but then we're like, okay, maybe we should shift the orientation for the projection to be then seen from the outside. So Rachel, I don't know if you want to talk more about the decisions for this one.
Yeah, I was quite attached to, because I had not been able to be present with Katina for the other installations. I'd either have a gig or something else, and I wouldn't be able to be in person with her. So we'd just be shipping the fabric back and forth. And I was so ensorcelled by the way that it looked in the shipping container at Art Basel Week in Miami. And I was kind of attached to that. I like wanting to see it in that tunnel vision, but realizing that this would open up the experience because the gallery can only be accessible, you know, when Madison is there, and Madison has a life and cannot be present at all times to be at the art gallery. So this way, with the glass wall, it really made a lot of sense for people to be able to witness it from the outside, and then when the gallery was open, to witness it from the inside. And it also gave this really interesting effect of the audience feeling exposed and viewed and put on display because their backs are to a glass wall in an art gallery. So I'm happy with how that turned out. I know it was hard for me to let go of that, but it was totally the right call.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Rachel. Like this idea of being watched as you're watching, kind of. Yeah. It's definitely such a unique space that I had never installed in a space like that before. And thanks to Jean's handy dandy, super short throw projector, we were able to make the projection big enough with only like a tiny little,
Yes.
narrow window. I think, was there anything else? I'm just trying to be cognizant of the time, because I know we're gonna have time for questions too. Was there anything else, Rachel, that you wanted to share about this?
Yeah, I was looking at the time as well. I think we're kind of right on target if there are questions that people want to ask.
Yeah, if you have questions, you can plop them into the chat, but I'm gonna get us started with a question. I really love that you talked about collaboration and that both of your practices heavily involve collaboration. And I feel like you talked a little bit about like how the two of you, like you saw each other and you're like, it's just like match made in heaven. But like what is sort of your criteria for selecting collaborators? How do you know that you want to have this person as a collaborator? Like what kind of check boxes do you have to have in your mind?
I could start with that one. I think the most important thing is that you like them. It does not matter how good someone is at their discipline. If you don't like them, you don't like spending time with them, it's going to be a nightmare. Like it's just not worth it. Quality of life should be priority number one. That's just my philosophy. So find someone that you like, and also, you know, you need to like their work, but you need to like them more.
Yeah, along those lines, I mean, we made this piece in 2021, right? And it's 2024, and we're still showing it, talking about it, working together. So clearly we don't hate each other that much right now. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is, yeah, it's so important. Yeah, what Rachel said on, and not, you know, yes, definitely. And for me personally too, I actually prefer with people collaborating with people that do something very different than what I do, because I think that, like I said, that's a really good way to bring additional skills into your work. But I think, like I said, conceptually and visually, you have to be on the same sort of level. And as soon as Rachel was like, I have this red fabric, I was like, what? Red fabric? I love everything red. And so I think, as long as like your concepts and your aesthetic has some sort of like overlap, I think it's technically wise. It is sort of better to be on completely opposite ends so that you can bring what you have to the table.
That's true, because we have super different backgrounds, and if we were really similar, it'd be like, why do I need a second one of me?
Yeah.
I need different skill set, different expertise.
Yeah, I love that. I guess also kind of like another question that I had in my mind, because we don't really get to see this that often, is there been any like collaborations or projects that have been failures that have been only you that have seen, because both of you are creating work that is so like outward facing. But what are these failures that you have, and then like how do you sort of deal with them? Do you like let it go? Does it transform into something else? I don't know if that's like too broad of a question.
A failed collaboration?
Failed collaboration or failed project. But I feel like you all are collaborating so often that I'm like, I think that there's probably a failed collaboration.
Oh, I have one absolutely off the like hard yes, right off the bat. I've had 2 failed collaborations, and the reason that they were not successful is because I agreed to them because someone else wanted to work with me. I didn't necessarily want to, like, the project wasn't super interesting. This is early on in my career, and I didn't realize that saying no has an extraordinary amount of power over the scope of your career. They're like, oh, they want to work with me. That's amazing. I'm so touched. Yes, of course I will. I liked them. I didn't particularly like their work, but I liked them. So I said yes,
It looks like we have a student question here.
Mhm.
How often do you find your initial vision different from the final product? I think it really depends on the project, right? I feel like with this project we had a very short window of time that we were going to be together, and I kind of felt like our vision and how we sort of sketched it out in our minds ended up being pretty similar to
Yes.
what we were envisioning it. But like for me and my own work, if I'm just in the studio fooling around, then sometimes, what I initially envision will be completely different, right? So I think it depends on that sort of like time constraint, right? Like if you only have this amount of time to get something done and you want this to be the end goal, then you kind of just work to make that happen. But then I think it's about having that balance of both structured projects and outcomes, and then also time just to play in the studio where you can have things that are, just sort of following the path of your, as you're making it, right?
Yeah, that's well put. And because everything that I make always begins the same way, which is just an image in my head that I can't shake, I don't have a hard time finding them to be quite similar once the final product is finished. I mean, the cutting room floor is going to be littered with darlings and things that I really didn't want to let go of. But if that image is still going to be there, it's going to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
Oh, we have another question. Could you speak to the importance of the sound in Blood Meal? How did you collaborate on the sound of this work or this piece?
I feel like Katina kind of drove that bus. I had this microphone was new. I bought it at the urging of a theatrical mentor before that residency. She's like, just get a microphone because you're using, a lot of storytelling in your work. So I just had a few bits of me singing to myself in the room, and then Katina. I feel like you drove that bus. So what did you do? What did you say?
Yeah, so I called it clicky clacky, I think in the beginning. I was like, I want those like clicky clacky. And I was, okay, this is gonna sound funny, but that was around the time. Oh, I wish I remember what the name of that episode was, but there was this season of American Horror Story where there were like these uh like old school vampires, and they would like come out and they would like do this thing like this. And so
Yes.
it made this like clicky clacky kind of noise. And I was trying to like reference that to Rachel. I was like, I want your body to do that, even though it looks unhuman. And I want the sound to also have that clicky clacky bone cracky kind of sound. And so I just like say the things, and then Rachel's like, okay, I can contort myself in these crazy ways and make the sound like that. Um, and so it's just yeah, and then for in terms of the other parts of the sound design though, yeah, a lot of them were made like I said, or like Rachel said, were these vocalizations that then were kind of heavily edited, not the singing parts, but the mouth sounds were kind of more heavily edited. And then also they were just you know, field recordings of the I mean, because we were on the ocean for the residency, so they were field recordings. But then again, you guys are on the ocean too. I'm not. I live in the middle of the country, which sucks. But anyways, so you guys have access to the ocean. So that was fun for me to do field recordings of that. And then we incorporated, you know, those water sounds into that as well. And I was just going to hop to this question. Oh, that wasn't about location for the project. Is how do you find locations to present the piece? So let's see. The one in Kentucky, I got a grant to visit the University of Kentucky and have a show, and I didn't know what piece. It was just like a solo show, and I didn't know what piece I was going to like install. And I was like to Rachel, I was like, "Hey, this is a really great opportunity to test this out as the installation that we envisioned it as." And I said, "Would it be okay, you know, if we installed this for that show?" And Becky, who runs their gallery, and Rachel were both like, yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. So then once we did that, then we had the documentation images from that exhibition. And so documentation, especially with installation, documentation images are key to get like your next thing, which is how we did for the satellite art fair, which I've worked with them before. And so that's how I did that. And then actually for you guys for fried fruit, it was just an application process that then I got another email from Madison after the first round or something. And then they're like, yeah, we want to show this. I was like, okay, cool. So that's how we sort of came about that. But we needed something that was a small enough space that where we could fill it, right? So we wanted, you know, so there still was quite a bit of consideration to what types of spaces we were applying for.
You'll probably do maybe one more question. And there's sort of two here, so maybe we can just do both of these, and then that would be it, if we're
Okay.
cool with that.
Yeah.
So the one question is, can you talk about the process of translating a live performance to film? Who was involved? Who fulfilled roles like camera work, editing? How did the work change, if at all?
Katina is our videographer and our video editor. And the way that that changes for me is that live performance is meant to be seen and then disappear. It's ephemeral like smoke. It's not meant to be seen in documentation unless it's specifically designed for that documentation. And we both just agreed, I think, on what angles we needed. And Katina was like, I think this should be really close up and this should be far away. And so that's how that went. Do you have anything to add to that, Katina?
No, I mean, so even in my own performance work, I think in terms of documentation. So I think it's just our brains are like, I'm like, okay, the documentation is the only thing I have that exists, right? After this is over with. So maybe I have more of an attachment issue with, you know, preserving things. But yeah, so I think that, you know, in my head, as we were making the work, I was thinking about like how we're going to document this, because I knew that I wanted it to live beyond just the live performance, just in terms of feasibility, right? To get this work out as, you know, far reaching as possible, you need it, or at least in my opinion, you need it to be in a lot of different presentation formats. And how did it change the work? I mean, it's looking at on your screen is like the worst way to see it, obviously, right? I think seeing it live, because the sound also, the thing I forgot to say is the sound design with it live is it has surround sound, and so it uses like panning. So like the water, like that one part, you know, when the water washes over Rachel, it actually in the theater, it goes from one room or one side of the room to the other. So the audio sounds like it's washing over the audience. And so the sound design it was really important part, and you totally lose it on your computer. Like it doesn't work at all. So seeing it live is like the number one best way to see it. Seeing the installation, I would say, is the number two best way to see it. And then everything else is just so you can kind of get a taste of what it's like.
Well put.
Rachel, did you feel claustrophobic under the fabric?
No, but I don't really get claustrophobic. I feel very safe under that fabric. And it can be quite heavy. It is slippery. It's treacherously slippery on a polished wood floor. It's much, much easier to work with on top of marley, which is like a dance surface. So if you're ever using fabric, try to get a marley floor if you can't. But no, it wasn't difficult. Like I said, there's just a little bit of anxiety about wanting to find the hole in the fabric at the right time in the dark. But it's a necessary piece of anxiety to drive you to meet your cues. But no, I felt safe because I like enclosed spaces.
Yeah, I think finding those marks was the hardest part, the marks on the floor in the dark, and also lined up with the projection and the audio cues at the same time. So I was working with multiple cues that Rachel had to hit all at once.
Without looking around, like
Around.
it's just really obvious when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Katina and Rachel, for joining us. And for those of you who are in the room with us, you can see Blood Meal until February 19th at Fried Fruit Art Gallery. And I'm also, just send me an email. I'm happy to meet you there if you want to see like the interior of the space. I'm kind of like always around here or there. So just reach out. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for
Enjoy
having
the
us.
rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been such a delight. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Still
Right.
recording.
It is recording, isn't it? Is it?
Yeah.
How do
Who
I-
started the
Oh, there
recording?
you go. I did it.